The cameras were rolling, the public was screaming, and inside the palace gates, something unprecedented unfolded. Queen Camilla was escorted out, not by protocol, but by command. What triggered the meltdown that's now shaken the monarchy to its knees? It all began with a single clip, a shaky video posted online by a passerby who hadn't even realized what they were filming. At first, it looked like any other royal departure. Black cars, suited security, a single figure entering a vehicle. But within minutes, royal watchers spotted the details. Camilla, Queen Consort, was being rushed out through a rarely used east gate. No formal send-off, no photographers summoned, just two stern-faced palace guards flanking her on either side and a deep, unspoken urgency in the air. By dawn, the video had gone viral. Headlines exploded across Europe and beyond. Queen Camilla escorted out of palace. Why? Inside Buckingham Palace, whispers turned to full-blown murmurs. Staffers moved quickly, avoiding eye contact, phones confiscated on the spot. But it was already too late. Multiple sources inside the royal household confirmed what many had feared. The order had come from the very top. And it wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. King Charles himself, under what some described as unimaginable pressure, had instructed his aides to initiate what insiders now call Operation Curtain Call. The goal? To remove Camilla quietly, without media spectacle, but in the age of smartphones, there is no such thing as silence. Earlier that morning, royal guards had taken up unfamiliar positions near Camilla's private quarters. To the untrained eye, it was subtle. But those who knew the inner workings of palace routine immediately sensed something was wrong. Normally assigned to the main corridors or ceremonial wings, their sudden placement near Camilla's wing raised eyebrows. One guard was even overheard, refusing questions with a simple phrase, "Orders from the top." Behind the royal walls, tension had been building for days. But what lit the match was a resurfaced interview with an old, controversial clip in which Camilla appeared to downplay the emotional legacy of Princess Diana. The timing couldn't have been worse. As Britain prepared for a national memorial honoring Diana's humanitarian work, the video re-emerged like a ghost from the past. Social media erupted. Hashtags like "Not My Queen" and "Justice for Diana" surged through Twitter and TikTok. Even typically conservative outlets began running panels questioning whether Camilla's presence on the throne had ever truly been accepted by the people. And outside Buckingham Palace, the air turned thick with fury. Protesters gathered with banners, Diana portraits, and voices that refused to be silenced. "She doesn't speak for us!" shouted one woman. "She never did!" Security struggled to contain the growing crowd, many of whom called for Camilla to be stripped of her title altogether. The Queen Consort's approval rating, which had barely climbed after decades of controversy, sank like a stone. Paparazzi, sensing blood in the water, staked out every gate. What they captured would become iconic. Camilla in the back of a darkened car, face pale, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her expression told no story, but perhaps that's what made it so haunting. Was she emotionless? Or simply defeated? The lack of expression only fueled speculation. Was this an exile, a punishment, or a calculated retreat? But the fury outside the gates was nothing compared to the inferno building within the royal walls, and the person fanning the flames wasn't who anyone expected. The cameras were rolling, the public was screaming, and inside the palace gates, something unprecedented unfolded. Queen Camilla was escorted out, not by protocol, but by command. What triggered the meltdown that's now shaken the monarchy to its knees? It all began with a single clip, a shaky video posted online by a passerby who hadn't even realized what they were filming. At first, it looked like any other royal departure. Black cars, suited security, a single figure entering a vehicle. But within minutes, royal watchers spotted the details. Camilla, Queen Consort, was being rushed out through a rarely used east gate. No formal send-off, no photographers summoned, just two stern-faced palace guards flanking her on either side, and a deep, unspoken urgency in the air. By dawn, the video had gone viral. Headlines exploded across Europe and beyond. Queen Camilla escorted out of palace. Why? Inside Buckingham Palace, whispers turned to full-blown murmurs. Staffers moved quickly, avoiding eye contact, phones confiscated on the spot. But it was already too late. Multiple sources inside the royal household confirmed what many had feared. The order had come from the very top. And it wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. King Charles himself, under what some described as unimaginable pressure, had instructed his aides to initiate what insiders now call Operation Curtain Call. The goal? To remove Camilla quietly, without media spectacle, but in the age of smartphones, there is no such thing as silence. Earlier that morning, royal guards had taken up unfamiliar positions near Camilla's private quarters. To the untrained eye, it was subtle. But those who knew the inner workings of palace routine immediately sensed something was wrong. Normally assigned to the main corridors or ceremonial wings, their sudden placement near Camilla's wing raised eyebrows. One guard was even overheard, refusing questions with a simple phrase, "Orders from the top." Behind the royal walls, tension had been building for days. But what lit the match was a resurfaced interview with an old controversial clip in which Camilla appeared to downplay the emotional legacy of Princess Diana. The timing couldn't have been worse. As Britain prepared for a national memorial honoring Diana's humanitarian work, the video re-emerged like a ghost from the past. Social media erupted. Hashtags like "Not My Queen" and "Justice for Diana" surged through Twitter and TikTok. Even typically conservative outlets began running panels, questioning whether Camilla's presence on the throne had ever truly been accepted by the people. And outside Buckingham Palace, the air turned thick with fury. Protesters gathered with banners, Diana portraits, and voices that refused to be silenced. "She doesn't speak for us!" shouted one woman. "She never did!" Security struggled to contain the growing crowd, many of whom called for Camilla to be stripped of her title altogether. The Queen Consort's approval rating, which had barely climbed after decades of controversy, sank like a stone. Paparazzi, sensing blood in the water, staked out every gate. What they captured would become iconic. Camilla in the back of a darkened car, face pale, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her expression told no story, but perhaps that's what made it so haunting. Was she emotionless, or simply defeated? The lack of expression only fueled speculation. Was this an exile, a punishment, or a calculated retreat? But the fury outside the gates was nothing compared to the inferno building within the royal walls, and the person fanning the flames wasn't who anyone expected. For months, Princess Catherine had said nothing, but when she did, every word ignited a firestorm the palace couldn't control. What she said behind closed doors, and what was leaked to the press, was the final nail in Camilla's coffin. It began with a whisper behind palace doors, a conversation never meant for the outside world. Yet somehow, a recording surfaced. The voice was unmistakably Catherine's, calm but laced with quiet fury. "I'm not convinced she's fit to stand beside His Majesty," she said. Those words weren't shouted, they weren't dramatic, but they hit like a hammer across a monarchy already teetering on the edge. Within hours, the audio clip was circulating among select press circles. By the next morning, it was everywhere. The context of the conversation made things worse. According to palace insiders, the confrontation had taken place during a tense family meeting in Windsor, where Camilla reportedly pushed to exclude Princess Charlotte from participating in an upcoming royal ceremony, an event historically attended by royal daughters. Catherine, protective and principled, was said to have erupted behind the scenes. But in public, she remained composed, until that recording slipped through the cracks. Fuel was thrown onto the fire when media outlets began linking Catherine's fury to a much deeper resentment. For years, Catherine had stayed above the fray, embodying the stoicism the monarchy so desperately needed. But now, long-dormant rumors reignited rumors that Catherine had grown increasingly unsettled by Camilla's quiet campaign to shift Diana's narrative. Whether it was in speeches, events, or subtle press briefings, Camilla's influence had crept into spaces once sacred to Diana's memory, and Catherine had noticed. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Team Catherine and the True Queen flooded timelines across the globe. Thousands reposted side-by-side images of Diana and Catherine, regal and revered, next to headlines suggesting Camilla's manipulations and ambition. Overnight, the public drew their own battle lines. Camilla no longer represented stability. Catherine, in her rare display of emotion, had tapped into something far deeper, a collective longing for integrity, for legacy, and for a royal future rooted in empathy rather than strategy. Behind closed doors, the pressure intensified. William, typically reserved in such matters, reportedly stood firmly beside his wife during a volatile council session. Charles, torn between duty and devotion, was said to have remained silent as William laid bare the fractures Camilla had caused. "This cannot go on," he allegedly told his father. "You know it, and the people know it too." By this point, the public wasn't just reacting, they were choosing. Commentators on global networks declared Catherine the de facto face of the monarchy. Polls showed a sharp dip in Camilla's favorability, while support for Catherine soared. And still, the palace refused to comment, further fueling the narrative that silence was its only remaining defense. But the final sting came not from the press or the public, but from within the family itself. Whispers turned into statements, and statements turned into resolve. For the first time in years, the people saw that Catherine wasn't just a quiet figure behind a future king. She was a force, a reckoning, a mother who would not allow history to be rewritten at the expense of truth. And as Catherine's words echoed through the kingdom, an unlikely royal stepped forward to deliver a truth that shattered every illusion Camilla had carefully constructed. She's known for her loyalty, her silence, and her unwavering commitment to the crown. But in a move that shocked even the inner royal circle, Princess Anne finally said what many had long suspected, and it was aimed directly at Camilla. The royal family has long depended on Princess Anne as its unshakable foundation, disciplined, discreet, never drawn into drama. So when she requested an urgent, off-the-books meeting with the palace's most senior advisors, the entire institution tensed. Anne wasn't a woman of outbursts or vendettas. If she had summoned them, something monumental was about to unfold. What followed inside that gilded chamber would echo throughout the kingdom. In that room, with decades of royal duty and burden in her voice, Anne made a disclosure so explosive it fractured the walls of silence surrounding Camilla's reign. According to multiple insiders, Anne revealed the existence of a private letter written by Queen Elizabeth herself in the twilight of her reign, one that laid out very clear boundaries for Camilla's role within the monarchy. It wasn't just ceremonial advice or loose reflection. The letter allegedly contained Queen Elizabeth's final wishes, specifically cautioning against Camilla ever taking a central public role without the express consent of the monarch's direct heirs. And then came the twist. Anne claimed Camilla had worked quietly to suppress this letter from surfacing. It had been tucked away in a locked vault under the guise of sensitive correspondence, shielded from public and even internal access. Until now. Anne, with her voice steady but eyes burning with royal defiance, declared, "This is not what our mother wanted, and I will not stay silent." The room, by some accounts, fell utterly still. Not a cough, not a breath. Anne had spent her entire life in service to the crown, not chasing titles, not courting headlines, but serving. And now, she was calling out what she believed to be a betrayal of that legacy. What made her words even more potent was what she implied next. That Camilla's public rise had not only gone against Elizabeth's private wishes, but had done so with active deception. That the crown, as it was now being displayed, had been altered not by duty but by personal ambition. Whispers began to turn into questions, questions into quiet outrage. If what Anne said was true, then everything Camilla had stood for, her image of reluctant grace, of quiet partnership, was nothing more than illusion. Palace aides scrambled behind the scenes to confirm the letter's existence. Some said they found references to it in the Queen's personal records. Others hinted at an internal conflict between two branches of the Royal Legal Council, one supporting Anne's claims, the other fiercely loyal to Charles and Camilla. The will, still officially sealed, became a symbol of a buried truth no one dared bring to light. And something shifted. You could feel it in the corridors, in the sudden change in tone from senior staff, in the way eyes no longer met when Camilla passed by. Her presence, once tolerated out of obligation, now carried the weight of suspicion. The royal family, bound by duty and hierarchy, had always protected its own. But this time, it was one of their own who had sounded the alarm, and not just anyone, but the Princess Royal herself. And while Anne's words carried the weight of royal legacy, what happened next would seal Camilla's fate not from within the palace, but from the people outside of it. Flags were burned. Posters of Diana rose from the ashes. Crowds chanted outside royal gates in scenes more intense than anything seen in a generation. Britain had made up its mind Camilla was no longer welcome. What had once been whispers in tabloids and subtle jabs on social media erupted into something no one could contain. This wasn't just a wave of discontent, It was a national reckoning. From the quiet streets of Windsor to the roaring heart of London, people poured into the streets carrying placards, candles, and voices that refused to be silenced. In Edinburgh, thousands gathered at Holyrood with one unified demand: remove Queen Camilla. It was no longer about personal disapproval, it had become a movement. The calls for her removal grew louder by the hour. In just 3 days, over 700 digital signatures flooded an online petition demanding that Camilla be stripped of her royal titles and privileges. Parliament couldn't ignore it, Buckingham Palace couldn't deflect it, news anchors spoke in stunned tones, admitting this was the most aggressive public uprising against a royal since the days following Diana's death. People weren't just angry, they were hurt, betrayed, determined to reclaim the soul of the monarchy they once revered. Then came the leak. An anonymous insider released classified documents, revealing alarming figures of Camilla's personal expenditures from the royal treasury. Lavish refurbishments, unlisted security trips abroad, and an opulent lifestyle that felt worlds away from the suffering of the public during economic downturns. The figures sparked outrage, but it was the context that stung the most. As food banks expanded and citizens struggled with rising costs, the Queen Consort appeared to be living in a palace of excess. The contrast was damning, and people didn't just notice, they reacted. And then, in a moment that took the world by storm, the Diana Memorial Alliance, an organization long dormant and largely ceremonial, emerged from the shadows. In an unannounced appearance, they arrived at the gates of Buckingham with thousands of supporters. They brought with them images, speeches, and a simple message: Diana would never be forgotten, and neither would the injustice done to her. Videos of the gathering went viral in minutes. A child's voice reciting one of Diana's famous lines, "Carry out a random act of kindness," was played over loudspeakers as people wept openly in the crowd. It wasn't political, it was emotional, it was personal. King Charles stood at the center of the storm, helplessly torn. Those close to him revealed a man crumbling beneath the weight of history. Loyalty to his wife pulled him in one direction. But the monarchy's survival, the legacy of his mother, the hope resting in William and Catherine pulled him fiercely in another. The crown, so carefully balanced for decades, now wobbled with a dangerous tilt. International headlines spoke the truth that many at home hesitated to utter: "The Queen Britain never accepted." That single phrase echoed across continents, from British broadsheets to American networks, and into every corner of the Commonwealth. Camilla, once tolerated, now symbolized a breach between the monarchy and its people. But as the monarchy trembled under the weight of public fury, it wasn't just Camilla's crown at risk, it was her place in the palace entirely. Behind those closed palace doors, King Charles stared out a window, torn between love and duty. What he did next shocked even his closest confidants, and he did it alone. In the days following the public revolt, Charles all but disappeared from view. His calendar was cleared without explanation. Private audiences were cancelled, state obligations deferred. While the world outside screamed for answers, inside the palace, the king moved like a man haunted, drifting through long corridors, rarely speaking, visibly shaken by the storm that had crept into his home and now threatened to consume everything. Those closest to him say he was not just distressed, he was unraveling. For a man who had spent a lifetime preparing to ascend the throne, no one had prepared him for this. To choose between his queen and the survival of his reign. The pressure was merciless. Letters poured in, officials whispered. Protesters chanted his name not with reverence, but with disappointment. And as it all weighed down, Camilla, too, began to break. Reports emerged of private pleading, Camilla begging Charles not to yield to the voices outside, not to silence her presence, not to strip her of the very role she had endured decades to claim. But Charles could no longer pretend the fury was temporary. The monarchy itself was trembling beneath the weight of public rage, and his silence had become a verdict in itself. In the quiet of his private chamber, Charles is said to have retrieved a letter tucked inside a drawer of one of Diana's final notes, a piece he had rarely looked at in recent years. It wasn't long, but it was piercing. She had written of legacy, of protecting the boys, of how history had a way of correcting its course, whether one welcomed it or not. And in that moment, with Diana's words in one hand and a fractured kingdom in the other, something shifted inside him. That same evening, A rare late-night meeting was called behind thick palace walls. Only 3 were present: Charles, William, and Princess Anne. What unfolded in that room remains shrouded in secrecy, but palace insiders heard the shouting. Voices raised, raw and emotional. Anne demanded resolution. William, who had tried to remain respectful, was said to have finally lost patience, raising his voice, speaking not as a prince but as a son who remembered the pain, who saw the people turning away, and who now feared the monarchy was losing its soul. Then, just after 2:00 a.m., the decision was made. A private order was signed. Queen Camilla would step away from all public duties indefinitely. There would be no announcement, no fanfare, only silence and swift, calculated removal. It was, by all measures, a quiet dethroning cloaked in the language of diplomacy. But those who understood the palace knew what it meant. Camilla was out not formally, not yet by title, but by action. And Charles had done it with the same hand that had once clutched hers in defiance of tradition. And so it happened, not with ceremony or grace, but with quiet orders and royal discretion, until the moment everything spilled into public view. No press was allowed, no official word was given, but someone talked, and what they described sent shockwaves through every corner of the kingdom. It was just past dawn when the palace stirred with movements that didn't fit the rhythm of routine. A trusted royal guard whose identity has been kept strictly protected later revealed what unfolded in those early hours. It wasn't an evacuation. It wasn't a ceremonial departure. It was a calculated removal, orchestrated with chilling precision. The orders were delivered the night before, but not through the usual chain of command. They came directly from the top, sealed and marked with urgency. No room for public exposure, no chance for resistance. That was the language reportedly used. When Camilla was approached in her private quarters, she resisted, not with a scream or spectacle, but with a steely silence. She reportedly demanded to see authorization. And when the sealed document was finally placed in her hands, the color drained from her face. The weight of the directive, a single sheet bearing King Charles's personal insignia, was unmistakable. There was no room for misunderstanding. Her role, at least for now, was over. Yet what made the moment more piercing was not just the paper, it was the presence of 2 women watching nearby, Catherine and Anne. Neither spoke, neither moved. They stood apart, but close enough to witness the moment unfold. Their silence was deafening, their presence a final, unspoken judgment. Camilla glanced in their direction, but neither returned her gaze. That absence of comfort, that void of sisterhood, left Camilla to walk the corridor alone. She exited through the eastern corridor, one rarely used, distant from the main entrances and often reserved for discreet royal exits. Her head remained high, as if trying to preserve some fragment of dignity. But those who saw her pass described her face as glass, rigid, pale, and hollow. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She simply walked, shadowed by 2 guards, and disappeared into the waiting vehicle without turning back. It was a walk of silence, a farewell without formality. The palace responded with a statement so vague it only deepened the mystery. It cited a temporary retreat for wellness and requested privacy, but the words did little to quiet the growing storm. By mid-morning, the internet had already given the moment a name: the escort. Hashtags spread across platforms, theories multiplied, leaks poured in. The veil of secrecy had torn, and the monarchy's attempt at quiet control had shattered on impact. And while some in the public viewed the escort as justice finally served, others began to sense that something far darker had occurred behind those palace gates. What could drive a queen to be quietly removed under cover of dawn? Why had the women who once stood beside her now stood back in silence? And what exactly was written in the directive Camilla was forced to read? But Camilla's exit didn't end the storm, it only fueled it. And now, with the world watching, someone from Camilla's own circle broke ranks. They were once her confidants, her protectors, her allies in every storm. But now, one by one, they were abandoning ship. And one voice among them exposed what no one dared to say before. The unraveling didn't end with her exit. It deepened. And this time, the damage didn't come from protesters or press. It came from those who had once stood closest to Camilla. A former advisor, long known for their loyalty to the Queen Consort, shocked the palace and the nation by leaking a series of damning revelations. In private moments, they claimed, Camilla confessed deep bitterness over living in Diana's shadow. She had grown tired of the constant comparisons, the ghost of a woman who continued to dominate public affection decades after her death. She would say, "I've paid the price. Why must I still be punished?" the advisor revealed. But that wasn't all. According to this insider, Camilla felt erased. That no matter what she did, the public would only ever see her as the woman who took what didn't belong to her. She reportedly confided that being queen didn't feel like a triumph but a burden, an inheritance wrapped in resentment. And if that weren't explosive enough, what came next hit even harder. Journal entries, said to be in Camilla's own handwriting, painted a devastating picture. "I feel like a ghost wearing a crown that never truly fits," she had written. "They never saw me, they only saw her." These weren't just private insecurities. They were the inner confessions of a woman unraveling beneath a title she could never wear without controversy. And soon, others began to speak. Her former stylist, who had worked with her for years, came forward in a televised interview. She knew the people would never accept her, they said. And it broke her in ways no one will ever fully understand. The smile you saw in public? That wasn't peace. That was survival. And then, a chilling rumor began to swirl, one that had quietly lingered in palace halls for years, that Camilla, at one point, had tried to leave, to walk away, to relinquish the role and return to private life. But she was persuaded to stay. Persuaded, the whispers claimed, not just by Charles's pleading but by palace strategists who feared what her absence might do to the fragile royal image. It was a sacrifice, some said. But others saw it differently. They saw it as ambition masked by fear, driven by control. A former close friend of Camilla's who had dined with her, traveled with her, and stood by her for decades delivered the final blow. She manipulated Charles, they claimed. Not cruelly, not overtly. But in moments when he was emotionally weakest, she steered him. She filled the gaps with promises of loyalty and love, but it always came with a cost. The accusation was stark. Camilla had positioned herself not just as a partner, but as a protector of the one man whose power could keep her in place. The cracks had become chasms. Her circle, once tightly held, was now splintering with betrayal and confession. And as her past closed in on her and her circle fractured, one unexpected appearance brought the nation to tears and changed the narrative entirely. It had been tucked away for decades. A letter from Diana never meant for cameras, never meant for headlines. But now, read aloud at a memorial event, it sent chills through the world. No one saw it coming. Hidden deep within the royal archives, catalogued only by number and quietly sealed for privacy, the letter surfaced during a private audit of Princess Diana's estate records, part of a routine review tied to a charity bearing her name. Its contents were never meant for the public, not even for the palace. But fate, it seems, had other plans. Authenticated and dated just 3 weeks before her tragic death, the letter carried a weight that no official statement ever could. It was more than a farewell. It was a prophecy wrapped in grace. The letter spoke of forgiveness, not just of others, but of herself. Diana reflected on the painful journey that had left her heartbroken and exposed. She wrote of legacy, of the importance of love over power, and most poignantly of her sons. She feared what the future might ask of them, how the throne might distort the very essence of who they were born to be. And in a moment of soul-staggering foresight, she wrote of the woman who might one day stand beside Charles. If they must one day accept her, she wrote, let her never forget whose shoes she walks in. It wasn't bitter, it wasn't venom, it was truly gentle, piercing, undeniable. The letter was read aloud at a public Diana memorial event held at Kensington Gardens. Catherine was in attendance, along with William and their children. Those who were present say Catherine broke down in tears as the final line was spoken. She wasn't alone. The crowd fell silent. Even journalists found themselves too moved to speak. It was as if Diana had returned for one last moment, not to strike, but to remind the world who she truly was. In the days that followed, the letter flooded every platform. The media dissected every word. Supporters hailed Diana's timeless dignity. And for the first time since Camilla's removal, the tone of public discourse shifted not away from judgment, but toward a more complicated reflection. Some felt a flicker of pity for Camilla, recognizing how heavy Diana's shadow had truly been. Others felt their fury rekindled, now anchored by the validation of Diana's own words. She had seen this moment coming. She had known. Camilla's absence at that moment became more than political. It became symbolic. A ghost at the edge of the throne, never fully embraced, never fully vanquished. Her silence, once defended as dignified, now read as guilt. And the letter, soft in its tone but thunderous in its implications, solidified what many had already begun to believe: that Diana's presence would never leave the monarchy, not in memory, not in legacy, and certainly not in comparison. But as the monarchy attempts to rebuild from the ashes, the final blow hasn't yet been struck, and it's about to come from an unexpected voice that's remained silent for far too long. For weeks, he said nothing. But now, standing before the press, flanked by Catherine and Princess Anne, Prince William delivered words that would redefine the monarchy and Camilla's legacy forever. The silence had grown deafening. With each passing day, pressure mounted on the future king to speak. As headlines raged and public sentiment shifted like a tidal wave, William had kept his distance. Some saw it as composure, others feared it was avoidance. But in truth, he had been waiting. Waiting not for the perfect moment, but for the right one. And when he stepped onto that small platform outside Clarence's house, eyes sunken yet focused, it was clear the weight of the crown already sat heavy on his shoulders. His voice didn't tremble. It didn't waver. It cut through the uncertainty like a sword through fog. He began with what many assumed he would never publicly admit. "There are deep fractures within the royal family," he said. "Some seen, some unseen, but all felt. There was no sugar, coating, no feigned perfection." For the first time, a future monarch acknowledged what the world already knew: the House of Windsor was bleeding from within. Then, without ceremony, he confirmed what had only been speculated. Camilla had withdrawn from her public duties, voluntarily, but he made no promise of return. "Her Majesty has stepped back," he said carefully, "and the future will determine the nature of her role." It was a gentle farewell cloaked in neutrality, but its subtext was deafening. There would be no restoration, no reinstatement. At least, not now. William then shifted the tone. He spoke not just of the past, but of the future. "We must now recommit to a monarchy shaped not by silence, but by transparency. Not by tradition alone, but by service. Not by hierarchy, but by earned respect." The crowd was silent, but those watching from around the world felt the pulse of a new era beating beneath those words. And then, with deliberate calm, he turned to his wife. Without naming her as successor, without making declarations that would stoke controversy, he gave a clear message. "In times of turmoil," he said, "the monarchy finds its balance in those who carry both strength and grace. And I am proud to walk beside the stabilizing heart of our future." Catherine's eyes glistened. The world understood. But William wasn't finished. With a glance to Anne, he nodded toward the old guard, those who had endured, adapted, and survived. He hinted at structural reform, of elevating new voices, of redistributing roles to reflect merit, not just blood. It was subtle, but it was revolutionary. This wasn't the monarchy of unshaken tradition. It was the monarchy of evolution, of accountability, of reckoning. By the time he stepped down from the podium, social media was ablaze. Messages of support flooded in from across the Commonwealth. Polls swung overnight. And for the first time in months, the monarchy felt like it had reclaimed its voice not through silence nor spectacle, but through truth. And so, Queen Camilla's chapter closes for now. Not with celebration, not with scandal, but with silence, shadows, and a kingdom still deciding whether to forgive or to forget. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.